There's questions under Standing Order 27, and I call on Deputy Micheál Martin. Deputy Martin.
Thank you, Las Ceann Comhairle. Tánaiste, I'm not sure whether you are aware of the many very devastating cases that we are getting in our emails and from constituents in relation to the devastating impact that the cuts to lone parents and the change to the one-parent family allowance brought in on the 1st of July is having on so many families across the country. I received a heartrending email last week from a woman who has been working actually since she was 14 years of age. She's had to move back in recent times to her family's home, her parents' home, because of the cuts to rent allowance and her inability to afford rent. Her lowest point was recently going to the post office, where she describes the impact of being cut from €150 to €81. And of course there's no increase in her wages. And close to €50 she will require to go to work to pay for the petrol. And she says, what the government has done today is to make me feel ashamed and humiliated because I am a lone parent. And I think you would have perhaps got similar sentiments, Tánaiste, because her view was, what does the Tánaiste care? Tánaiste is just trying to liberate us. You've just set me back probably years again. I'm ashamed of the Irish government. Now, your Chief Whip, Emmett Stagg, equally finds your cuts indefensible. And he says in a letter or an email to his constituents who have been onto him about this, I voted for this in 2012 because he says he was told that the childcare system that was promised would be in place before the last and most severe of the changes. And then he says, I simply feel there has been an angry debate at our parliamentary party meetings on the issue. I simply fail to see how cutting the income of the very ones who are making a real effort, this is from Deputy Stagg, to improve the lot of their family and themselves helps them in some way to get out of their poverty, of the poverty trap. It clearly has the opposite effect. I will continue to press for a reversal of this bad decision. And he finally says, I don't blame you, he says to his constituent, I don't blame you for withdrawing support from the party. But I will continue to try to convince those who are making the decisions. Now, clearly, Tánaiste, he hasn't convinced you, because you're the person who is making the decisions and who has made the decision that has actually caused genuine suffering to many, many people. And I've come through other cases. A 53-year-old man earning €200 is getting zilch now, no lone parents. And because he's self-employed, he gets no family income supplement. He's been refused this a second time. And he's been working since he's 14 years of age.
Thank you, Deputy.
A woman with a medical condition, been advised by the welfare office, don't work anymore. This woman is working. Don't work anymore, go on to disability or invalidity. Another self-employed woman is now getting zero payment and has to close down a child-minding service that she's been operating for 10 years in order to get some work outside of the home.
Put a question, please, Deputy.
The question I have to put is the Minister aware of the deep, deep suffering that many, many families are now experiencing? And secondly, does she agree with her own Chief Whip, Deputy Emmett Stagg, that this is a bad decision, that it will not help people out of the poverty trap, that it clearly has the opposite effect? Do you agree with Deputy Stagg in his assessment of the cuts that you have introduced?
Thank you. Tánaiste.
The first thing that I want to say in relation to lone parents is that notwithstanding very significant spending, particularly by your own government during the height of the boom, that the position of lone parents in relation to being at risk of poverty was actually higher down than it is now, because Fianna Fáil basically refused, and that government refused. I think John Downing was on the radio in recent times recalling how, in a discussion with one of the Fianna Fáil ministers for social protection, notwithstanding the advice in those days of the OECD and others, that lone parents were the people most at risk of poverty in Irish society. This was a time when there was a lot of money to spend on social welfare, but Fianna Fáil chose not to do any kind of reform. And bear in mind that the purpose of this reform, which is ongoing now into its 3rd year, is actually through a combination of work of approximately 19 hours a week and family income supplement to lift the situation for a lone parent and to bring their income up above 400 a week and more, depending on the number of children they have and depending on the hourly rate at which they're employed. So for a lone parent, for instance, who would be only on lone parents' allowance for themselves and one child, that would work out at the moment at an average of about $220 a week. And I think most people in this House would agree that's a very low income. But if you move and you help a lone parent to transfer to 19 hours a week of work or so at the minimum wage, and you give that lone parent family income supplement, the consequent change in the lone parent's income it goes to over €400 a week. Now, if this House and this society and this country is serious, and in particular if Fianna Fáil are serious about addressing the very real issues of poverty, if they are serious about addressing the very real issues of poverty among lone parents, then you have to actually what did Deputy Stagg say? Deputy Stagg actually said, as recently as this morning, on a local media outlet, that in fact the reform was a good reform. Now, secondly, in respect of Deputy O'Dea's question, in respect of the childcare issue, what we did was unique to Ireland. We raised the age from 5 years, as it is in the UK, the North, and most of Scandinavia, to 7 years to make a provision for when the child is settled in primary school, in and around first class. And secondly, what we did is we brought in no requirement to work, no requirement. We put in a transition 7-year period so that the requirement to work arises, like any job seeker, arises from the age of 14. So we have actually brought in an extra 9-year transition period compared to the recommendations of the OECD. Well, if you're concerned about poverty and lone parents, you have to agree, as Deputy Stagg does, that the current system has not worked. The current system, in Fianna Fáil's time, there was $1 billion a year or so spent on lone parents.
Thank you, Tánaiste.
It didn't lift lone parents out of poverty. Deputy Martin, that's the question you have to answer. Why were you never in your long ministerial career in Fianna Fáil ever concerned about trying to move lone parents in Irish society to a better, to a respected place, whereas what you seem to want to do is avoid the issue of lifting lone parents out of poverty. I want to lift lone parents out of poverty.
Sorry, could we have order, please? For the person in possession, please have order, and Deputy Martin for a supplementary question, please.
Tánaiste, could I just give you a bit of advice? This kind of political grandstanding has absolutely no impact, or doesn't seek to persuade the people that I identified this morning. It doesn't convince the woman who wrote to Spark, for example, who's down €70 a week, and who says, I really don't want to go into the figures. I get a lump in my throat. I dread the thought of winter. And all of the letters we're getting and emails are saying, I just cannot afford the childcare. One woman said that she has to tell her child now to stay indoors or to stay there until 1 o'clock until I get back. Because you promised a Scandinavian-type childcare provision, which never happened. Which never happened.
You've done nothing about childcare.
And another person says, the future is very bleak for me and my gem of a 12-year-old. You see, Tánaiste, you can do all the grandstanding here and all the political sort of stuff that you do because you quoted figures that are wrong, but that's what you want to do. You want to go down the cut. I'm not going to go down there. Biggest mistake made, quoting wrong stats. And this is not from me, but from people communicating who were incensed by your performance last week on this. Because they're fed up of trying to play figure against figure. Because the policy isn't working. Over 60% in 2012 of lone parents were at least in part-time employment. The figure now in 2014 is 36%. So the policy is not working. And the bottom line, Emmett Stagg, Deputy Stagg, your chief whip, he doesn't agree with you. I mean, it's black and white to his constituent. I simply, he says, failed to see how cutting the income of the very ones who are making a real effort to improve the lot of their family and themselves helps them in some way to get out of the poverty trap. It clearly has the opposite effect.
Thank you,
I will continue to press for a reversal of this bad decision. And he even says that he understands fully why this person will never vote for the party again. That's what he says in the email.
Question.
But he says he'll continue to try and convince you that you're wrong and to reverse the bad decision.
How was that going, Emmett?
Now, I asked you at the outset, and to be quite honest, the lone parents out there who are suffering, and their children who are suffering, don't give a damn really about Joan Burton having a cut off Micheál Martin. That, to them, sums up the detachment of those in government from politics. What they really want to hear is, who's going to bridge the gap for me? Who's going to pay to enable me to get my child to school next September? Who's going to enable me to get the petrol, to get to work, to provide funding for childcare?
Thank you, Deputy.
But sorry, I'm not worried. They don't really look. They're not. Sorry,
Deputy.
they are not. They're not into party of politics. It is meaningless to them. It is meaningless to them, Tánaiste. It is meaningless to them, Tánaiste. That type of stuff that you're going on. What they really want to hear, is there any glimmer of hope at all?
Thank you.
That you will see the light and accept that this measure you introduced on the 1st of July is having a devastating impact on quite a significant number of lone parents and their children.
Thank you. I have to call this.
And will you do something to change it?
Thank you.
Because everybody is saying it in this House, and you refuse to be convinced.
Thank you.
Even your own party is saying it.
Tánaiste to reply.
Can I just suggest, Deputy Martin, when you have the time, to actually look at some of the figures you have just read out in the House here about the numbers of lone parents in work, because your figures are wrong, and I'll provide you with the updated figures and with the recent figures according to Silk. Your figures are just plain wrong. We could actually have a better debate if actually you came in here with some knowledge of what the situation is on the ground. Secondly, can I just say this to you, that for instance the back to work family dividend, which we introduced in the budget, has now had 2,500 people, families, who have actually applied for it. And another 500. Well, sorry, that's actually for a family with 2 children. That is worth €60 a week, and it is specifically designed to help, including people who are self-employed, by the way. But you've obviously never heard of it. You refer to 2 self-employed people there. The back to work family dividend is actually available for self-employed people. I'm going on the cases that you raised. Can I ask you seriously? Can I ask you? as a responsible politician, to actually give us the actual details of the people involved, because the approach by the social welfare offices around the country is to actually meet people on a one-to-one. It's actually helping people on a one-to-one basis to get back to education, to get back to training, to actually get employment. If they need extra hours, to get extra hours from their employer. Also, in the budget and at the time of the budget, we have a series of initiatives underway which will significantly improve, I hope, the position for all low-paid people, including, well, I'm awaiting the report of the Low Pay Commission, something Fianna Fáil never did, something Fianna Fáil cut the minimum wage, you cut a lone parent, Fianna Fáil cut the lone parents' weekly income in terms of lone parents by how much? €1640 a week. And secondly, Fianna Fáil cut the minimum wage by €1 an hour. So a lone parent in Fianna Fáil's time, of the kind that Emmett is talking about, lost €16 a week. And secondly, if they were working 15 hours a week, lost actually 15 more euros. So they were actually down 30 euros a week.
Thank you.
That's your legacy.
Sorry, I've called